Rich husband left with mistress. I took off my wedding ring and filed for divorce. He panicked. The January wind whipped through Boston's Beacon Hill, sending fallen leaves dancing across the cobblestone sidewalks. Corinne Hale stood in her pristine home office, methodically arranging fabric swatches for her latest interior design project. At 39, she had mastered the art of control, from the perfectly organized desk drawer to the precisely curated wardrobe that hung in her walk-in closet, each piece a testament to understated elegance. Her slim fingers traced the edge of an imported linen sample as she glanced at the silver-framed photo on her desk. She and Julian at their vacation home in the Berkshires last summer. Her husband's confident smile dominated the image, his tall frame and athletic build casting a protective shadow over her more delicate figure. The picture was perfect, like everything else in their life together. Perfect, until it wasn't. The text message still burned in her mind. Meeting running late. Don't wait up. She hadn't meant to see the other notification that flashed across his phone when he'd left it on the kitchen counter earlier that morning. The one from Heather, his former intern, now supposedly working at their company's Chicago office. Except Heather wasn't in Chicago. She was right here in Boston, sending hearts and promises about tonight. Corinne's blue-gray eyes fixed on her reflection in the window. The shoulder-length brown hair, carefully styled to frame her face. The minimal makeup that enhanced her natural features. She looked exactly like what she'd spent 20 years becoming. The perfect wife of Julian Rosner, the successful entrepreneur from Greenwich who'd swept her off her feet during their final year of college. The daughter of a truck driver from Concord, New Hampshire, had transformed herself into a fixture of Boston's social scene. She'd learned to navigate charity galas and corporate dinners with practiced ease, to smile at the right moments, to support Julian's dreams while carefully containing her own. The RISD-trained designer in her had been relegated to suitable projects that wouldn't overshadow her husband's achievements. Her phone buzzed. Another client rescheduling. Mrs. Bradford wasn't comfortable proceeding with the renovation without consulting Mr. Rosner first. The unspoken truth hung in the air. Corinne's reputation had always been tied to Julian's name, his connections, his world. She walked to the kitchen, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. Every surface gleamed. Every appliance stood exactly where it should. The dining room table was already set for dinner, Julian's favorite wine breathing in the crystal decanter, the temperature perfectly controlled. She'd planned everything, down to the last detail, just not in the way he'd expect. The envelope sat in the center of his plate, white and stark against the fine china. Inside, divorce papers waited with empty signature lines. Next to them, her wedding ring would rest. A simple, elegant statement that needed no dramatic accompaniment. Corinne checked her watch. 7:30 p.m. Julian would arrive at 8 assuming Heather didn't delay him further. She touched the delicate chain around her neck, a gift from her mother on her graduation day. "Remember who you are," her mother had said. For the first time in decades, Corinne was doing exactly that. The security system chimed, announcing Julian's arrival. Right on time. He'd always been punctual, even in his betrayals. Corinne heard his keys in the lock, the familiar sound of his briefcase hitting the entryway table, his confident footsteps approaching. "Something smells amazing," he called out, his voice carrying that warm public-speaking tone he'd perfected over years of board meetings. He appeared in the doorway, all 6'1" of him wrapped in tailored perfection, green eyes bright with practiced charm. "You didn't have to wait for me." Corinne stood, smoothing her cream-colored blouse. "Actually," she said, her voice steady, "I did. We need to talk." The silence that followed was 19 years in the making. Julian's fingers trembled slightly as he lifted the divorce papers from his plate, the sterling silver flatware clinking against fine bone china. The sound echoed through their dining room like a bell tolling in an empty church. His carefully maintained composure cracked just for a moment, before his professional mask slid back into place. "This is absurd," he said, his voice carrying that familiar patronizing tone he used during difficult business negotiations. "Whatever you think is happening, we can discuss this rationally." He reached for the wine decanter, but Corinne's hand got there first. "Like how rationally you discussed closing the Chicago office while Heather conveniently transferred to Boston." The words came out softer than she'd expected, wrapped in 19 years of carefully modulated control. "Or how rationally you explained working late every Thursday for the past 3 months." The color drained from Julian's face, but his recovery was swift. Years of corporate crisis management had taught him well. "Corinne, you're overreacting. Heather is a valuable employee." Don't. She placed her wedding ring beside his plate with deliberate precision. I'm not one of your shareholders, Julian. I don't need your carefully crafted explanations. The February wind rattled the windows of their Beacon Hill home, and Corinne thought about all the storms they'd weathered together. Or rather, all the storms she'd weathered while Julian created perfect shelters of denial. She remembered their first apartment, how she'd covered the watermarks on the ceiling with strategically placed art pieces so his parents wouldn't judge their starter home, how she'd learned to smile through his mother's backhanded compliments about her humble beginnings in New Hampshire. What about the Carlisle project? Julian switched tactics, his voice softening. They specifically requested you because of our connection. Think about your career. My career. A quiet laugh escaped her lips. You mean the carefully curated version that fits neatly into your world? The one where I take just enough projects to stay busy but not so many that I might outshine the great Julian Rosner? He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's not fair. I've always supported your work, as long as it supported your image. Corinne remained seated, her posture perfect, a habit ingrained from countless society dinners. Did you know I turned down the Modern Art Museum renovation last year? They wanted something bold, contemporary. Not quite our style, you said. Think of our brand. Julian paced the room, his expensive shoes marking a familiar path across the Persian rug, the one his mother had chosen for them as a housewarming gift. We can fix this, he insisted. Couples counseling, a vacation, whatever you need. The house in the Berkshires is already on the market. Corinne finally stood, gathering the dinner plates she'd set out of habit rather than intention. The paperwork is being processed. He froze. You sold our house? Without consulting me? No, Julian. I sold my house. The one I inherited from my grandmother. The one you insisted we renovate into your perfect weekend retreat. She carried the plates to the kitchen, the mundane action grounding her. Check the deed. It was never in both our names. Following her, Julian leaned against the kitchen island. Imported marble, his choice. What do you want? Is this about money? Position on the board? I can make adjustments. I want... Corinne placed the dishes in the sink, watching the light play across the wedding ring she no longer wore. I want to stop being an adjustment in your life. The silence that followed felt like a physical presence, filling the space between them with 19 years of unspoken truths. Outside, a car alarm blared briefly before falling silent. Julian reached for her hand across the island, but Corinne stepped back. The movers are coming tomorrow for my things. She straightened a kitchen towel that had fallen slightly askew. I've rented a place in Back Bay. My lawyer will contact yours in the morning. Back Bay? His laugh held a note of disbelief. On your own? Corinne looked at him then, really looked at him, seeing not the polished businessman from Greenwich but the scared boy who'd never learned to stand without his family's foundations. That's the thing, Julian. I was never not on my own. I just pretended otherwise for so long that we both believed it. She walked to the entryway, picked up her coat, classic camel wool, appropriate for a Beacon Hill wife, and slipped it on. I'm staying at the Liberty tonight. Please don't call. Corinne, his voice cracked, finally real. Don't do this. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. I already have. The difference is, this time, I'm doing it for myself. The door closed behind her with a quiet click, an understated ending to a perfectly curated life. As she walked to her car, the cold air bit at her cheeks, but for the first time in years, Corinne felt warm inside. The earthquake she'd feared for so long had come and gone, and she was still standing. The Back Bay apartment felt both too large and too small. Corinne stood in the center of her new living room, surrounded by moving boxes labeled in her precise handwriting. Morning light streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across hardwood floors that needed refinishing. The space was decidedly imperfect, exactly what she needed. Her phone buzzed for the third time that morning. Another client cancellation. The message was politely worded but clear. Given the current circumstances, we feel it's best to pursue other options. Translation. Without the Rosner name, her social currency had plummeted. 3 weeks post-separation, and already her carefully built professional world was showing cracks. Outside her window, joggers traced paths along Commonwealth Avenue, their breath visible in the March air. A young couple walked hand in hand, stopping to admire the brownstone's architecture. Corinne remembered being that young, that hopeful, standing with Julian on this same street, planning their future. Now, at 39, she was planning again, but the empty canvas before her felt more terrifying than exciting. The doorbell rang, startling her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her circle of friends had proven to be more Julian's than hers, their loyalty as conditional as her former clients. When she opened the door, the past walked in wearing red-tinted curls and a knowing smile. "Maya," Corinne's voice caught in her throat. Maya Claremont stood in her doorway, 15 years older but somehow exactly the same. Her dark eyes held that familiar intensity, and her curves filled out a vintage leather jacket with the confidence of someone who'd never needed society's approval to feel beautiful. "Your mom called me," Maya said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Took me a while to track you down. Back Bay, really?" She looked around the apartment, taking in the boxes and the bare walls. "At least it's not Beacon Hill." Corinne closed the door, her heart racing. The last time she'd seen Maya had been at graduation. They'd fought. About choices, about authenticity, about the very life Corinne had just walked away from. "I didn't know you and my mother still talked." "We don't." But she remembered I worked in crisis counseling, and apparently you're in crisis. Maya set down her oversized bag and began opening boxes, reading labels. "Though, from what I hear, you're handling it with your usual Virgoan precision." "I'm not in crisis," Corinne protested, watching as Maya unearthed a box marked Kitchen Essential. "I'm just reinventing your entire life at 40. "Yeah, been there." Maya pulled out a coffee maker, not the expensive one from the Beacon Hill house, but Corinne's old one from college. "Oh my God, you still have this? Remember those all-nighters during finals?" The memory hit hard. Maya and Corinne in their dorm room, running on caffeine and determination, singing Alanis Morissette songs at 3 a.m. to stay awake, before Corinne learned to modulate her voice, to take up less space, to fit into Julian's world. "I thought you were in California," Corinne said, trying to maintain some control over this unexpected invasion. "Oakland was." Maya had already found coffee filters and beans. The familiar gurgle of the machine filled the quiet apartment. "Now I'm here." Boston needed someone doing real work with women in transition, not just corporate wellness bullshit. The scent of brewing coffee brought back more memories, late-night conversations about dreams, fears, the future. Maya had warned her about Julian, about losing herself in someone else's expectations. Corinne had accused her of jealousy, of not understanding what real love meant. "Maya, about what I said back then, already forgotten?" Maya handed her a chipped mug, another relic from their shared past. "But you're going to tell me everything now, starting with how you finally found your backbone and kicked Greenwich Ken to the curb." Corinne stared into her coffee, black and strong, just like in college. "It's not that simple. Never is." Maya settled onto the floor, patting the space beside her. "But we've got time, and you've got unpacking to do." For a moment, Corinne hesitated. The floor was dusty, her clothes weren't meant for sitting on hardwood, and there was a perfectly good couch just 10 feet away. But Maya's presence had already disrupted every careful boundary she'd built. What was one more? She sat, feeling the hard floor beneath her, the warmth of the coffee cup in her hands, the weight of Maya's gaze on her face. "I don't know where to start." "Start with the truth," Maya said softly. "That's always the hardest part." Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Cars honking, people laughing, life moving forward. Inside, surrounded by boxes of her past and the ghost of her younger self, Corinne took a deep breath. The truth. She'd spent so long arranging everything else into perfect patterns, she'd almost forgotten what that word meant. "I think," she said slowly, "I forgot how to hear my own voice." Maya nodded, her eyes warm with understanding. "Then let's start there. Sometimes you need an echo to find your sound again." The legal office buzzed with quiet efficiency, all mahogany and muted conversations. Corinne sat across from her attorney, Rachel Winters, a sharp-minded woman in her 50s who'd built her reputation on handling high-profile divorces with minimal drama and maximum effectiveness. The morning sun caught the edge of Rachel's steel-gray hair as she reviewed the latest correspondence from Julian's lawyers. "He's contesting the Berkshire house sale," Rachel said, sliding her reading glasses down her nose. "Claims he had verbal agreements about shared ownership, but the paperwork is clear. It was your inheritance, your name on the deed. He doesn't have a leg to stand on." Corinne nodded, her fingers absently tracing the empty space where her wedding ring used to be. Julian always believed intentions mattered more than facts, at least his intentions. "He's also requesting a detailed accounting of your client list. Says many of your contacts came through his business connections." Rachel's tone carried a note of practiced patience. which would matter if you were competing with him in finance but interior design. It's about control, Corinne said, remembering Maya's words from their coffee-fueled conversation 2 days ago. He needs to prove I can't succeed without him. A knock at the door interrupted them. Rachel's assistant entered with a stack of papers and a concerned expression. Mrs. Hale, there's someone from the Boston Design Association in the lobby. They say it's urgent. Corinne's stomach tightened. The BDA board meeting wasn't scheduled until next week. She excused herself and walked to the lobby, her heels clicking against marble floors. The sound reminded her of all the times she'd walked into Julian's office, always perfectly put together, always the supportive wife. Bernard Richards, the BDA president, stood by the reception desk. His usual jovial demeanor was replaced with professional distance. Corinne, thank you for taking the time. Bernard, what's this about? He shifted uncomfortably. The board has concerns about your continued participation in the spring showcase. Given recent developments, some of our sponsors feel— You mean Julian's friends feel? Corinne interrupted, her voice steady despite the rush of anger in her chest. Several key donors have expressed reservations. The showcase has always been about stable partnerships, family values. No, Corinne said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. The showcase is about design, innovation, and talent. Unless my divorce somehow erased 15 years of experience? Bernard had the grace to look embarrassed. Of course not, but I'll save you the trouble. Corinne reached into her bag, pulled out her BDA membership card. I resign. The board can stop worrying about their precious donor relationships. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Bernard? The Atwood Foundation was my connection, not Julian's. My mother altered their matriarch's wedding dress 30 years ago. I'd check their sponsorship status if I were you. The satisfaction of Bernard's shocked expression carried her back to Rachel's office. Her attorney looked up, reading something in Corinne's face. Everything okay? Just Boston's social circle doing what it does best. Corinne sat down, straightened her spine. Let's finish this. Hours later, she sat in her new apartment, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and fading daylight. Her phone lit up with Maya's name. Tell me you're not stress organizing your sock drawer, Maya said without preamble. Despite everything, Corinne laughed. Actually, I just quit the Boston Design Association. Thank God. Those pretentious— Maya. What? I'm just saying, any organization that values marriage status over talent deserves to lose you. A pause. You free tonight? Corinne glanced at her carefully organized calendar, still filled with social obligations she no longer had to keep. Why? Because there's this dive bar in Jamaica Plain that does karaoke on Thursdays. And you, my perfectly polished friend, need to remember what it feels like to scream Alanis Morissette at strangers. I can't just— Yes, you can. Get out of those designer clothes, put on something that hasn't been approved by Greenwich Society, and meet me there at 8. Maya's voice softened. Sometimes you need to make noise to find your voice again. Corinne looked at her reflection in the window. She'd dressed that morning in a perfectly tailored blazer and silk blouse, armor for the legal meeting. But who was she dressing for now? She walked to her closet, past the careful rows of beige and cream, to a box she hadn't unpacked yet. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a leather jacket she'd bought in college but never had the courage to wear. Julian had called it too aggressive for his wife's image. Text me the address, she said to Maya. That's my girl. Maya's smile was audible. Oh, and Corinne? Wear something that would make Julian's mother clutch her pearls. After hanging up, Corinne opened another box labeled Pre-Julian. Inside, under years of careful preservation, lay pieces of herself she'd packed away. Band t-shirts, ripped jeans, silver jewelry that was more artistic than elegant, pieces of a woman who wasn't afraid to take up space. She pulled out the leather jacket. It still fit perfectly. The karaoke bar in Jamaica Plain was everything the Beacon Hill Country Club wasn't. Christmas lights hung year-round above a scuffed wooden bar, and the air smelled of stale beer and forgotten dreams. Maya sat in a corner booth, her red-tinted curls catching the neon light, grinning as Corinne approached in her resurrected leather jacket. Look who finally came out of hibernation. Maya raised her glass, eyes sparkling. The jacket survived. Barely. Julian's mother tried to accidentally donate it twice. Corinne slid into the booth, hyper-aware of how different this felt from her usual Thursday nights at Le Petit Bistro with the country club wives. A worn karaoke songbook lay open on the table. Maya pushed it toward her. Time to remember who you were before you became Mrs. Rosner. I can't just— You can't? Maya leaned forward. Or Julian's voice in your head says you can't. The question hit harder than the whiskey Maya had ordered for her. How many times had she censored herself, modified her behavior, all to fit Julian's idea of the perfect wife? Even now, weeks after leaving, she could hear his voice, a bit undignified, "Don't you think, darling?" The karaoke machine crackled as someone murdered a Journey song. The singer was terrible but laughing, surrounded by friends who cheered every off-key note. When was the last time Corinne had allowed herself to be imperfect in public? "You know what Julian said when I suggested redecorating our first apartment?" Corinne took a long sip of whiskey. "He said, 'Let's not make it too creative, dear. My parents visit often.' And you listened?" "I did more than listen. I became exactly what they wanted. The perfect corporate wife. Do you know I haven't worn red in 7 years because his mother said it was attention-seeking?" Maya's eyes narrowed. "Okay, that's it." She grabbed the songbook, flipping pages with purpose. "You're singing." "Maya, no. You spent 19 years being quiet. Tonight you make noise." She stopped at a page, jabbed her finger at a title. "This one." Corinne looked at the song choice and felt something between a laugh and a sob rise in her throat. "You Remember Me," by Alanis Morissette. Their anthem from college, before life and choices and compromises had separated them. "I can't." Maya stood, pulling Corinne up. "The woman who just told the entire Boston Design Association to shove it can't sing a song?" The whiskey burned warm in her chest. The leather jacket felt like armor, and somewhere, in a voice that sounded like her college self, Corinne heard the echo of who she used to be. 5 minutes later, she stood on the small stage, microphone in hand. The opening notes filled the bar, and suddenly she was 20 again, fearless and full of dreams. The first words were shaky, but by the chorus something broke free. She sang about rage and redemption, about being silenced and finding her voice. Her perfect society wife composure cracked with each note, replaced by something raw and real. In the crowd, Maya whooped and raised her glass, her eyes shining with pride and unshed tears. The final notes faded and the bar erupted in applause. Corinne barely heard it over the sound of her own heartbeat. She'd forgotten this feeling, the pure joy of not caring about perfection. Back at the booth, Maya ordered another round. Julian's mother would have fainted. "Good." Corinne's voice was hoarse, but her smile felt real. "I spent too long trying not to offend her sensibilities." Speaking of offending sensibilities, Maya pulled out her phone, showing Corinne a social media post. It was from one of Julian's cousins, a photo from a charity gala, showing Julian with Heather, his hand possessively on her lower back. "They're not even trying to hide it anymore," Maya said carefully, watching Corinne's reaction. But instead of pain, Corinne felt something unexpected. Relief. The photo showed exactly what she'd walked away from, a world of carefully curated appearances and hollow gestures. "You know what's funny?" Corinne traced the rim of her glass. "He's already molding her. Look at her dress. Beige, conservative. Classic Rosner wife material. Last year she wore bright colors and bold prints. Now she's disappearing. Like you did. Like I did." Corinne straightened. "But not anymore." She grabbed the songbook again. "What's next?" Maya's smile turned wicked. "How do you feel about Pat Benatar?" Hours later, they stumbled out of the bar into the cool night air. Corinne's feet hurt from dancing, her voice was shot, and her perfect blowout was decidedly imperfect. She felt more alive than she had in years. "Thank you," she said, as they waited for their ride, "for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." Maya squeezed her hand. "You never gave up. You just got lost for a while, but you're finding your way back." Above them, the Boston skyline glittered with possibility. Corinne looked at her reflection in a store window. Smudged makeup, messy hair, genuine smile. For the first time in 19 years, she recognized herself. The crack in the living room wall of Corinne's Back Bay apartment had been bothering her for weeks. In her old life, she would have immediately called a contractor, ensuring everything remained pristine. Instead, she found herself studying it one Sunday morning, seeing not an imperfection, but a possibility. "You're actually going to do this yourself?" Maya sat cross-legged on a drop cloth, watching as Corinne mixed plaster in a bucket. "Who are you, and what have you done with my perfectionist friend?" YouTube tutorials exist for a reason. Corinne adjusted her old RISD t-shirt, now spotted with primer. "Besides, I used to love getting my hands dirty in design school. Before Julian's mother had a conniption about her daughter-in-law doing manual labor." Maya handed her a putty knife. Speaking of the Connecticut royalty, have you checked your email? Corinne's hand stilled. You mean the invitation to the Rosner Family Foundation's annual gala? Already deleted it. Good girl. Maya grinned. Though I would have loved to see their faces if you showed up in that leather jacket. The memory of the karaoke night 2 weeks ago brought a smile to Corinne's face. She'd woken up the next morning with a hoarse voice and 3 missed calls from Julian's sister, who'd seen someone's social media post of her performance. The old Corinne would have been mortified. The new one had simply blocked the number. A knock at the door interrupted their banter. Corinne opened it to find a courier holding a thick envelope. Her heart sank when she saw the return address. Rosner Industries. More legal papers? Maya asked as Corinne returned to their plastering project. Worse. Corinne ripped open the envelope. Julian's trying to buy me out of our shared property investments. For less than half their value, of course. Of course. Maya's voice dripped sarcasm. Because heaven forbid you maintain any connection to his precious empire. Corinne stared at the documents, remembering all the times she'd sat in board meetings, offering insights that Julian would later present as his own. How many decisions had she influenced from the shadows, playing the supportive wife while her own ambitions gathered dust? You know what? She tossed the papers aside. He can have the properties. I'm done playing his game. Maya raised an eyebrow. You sure? That's a lot of money to walk away from. It's not about the money. Corinne dipped the putty knife into the plaster, began filling the crack with slow, deliberate strokes. It's about breaking the pattern. Every time I engage with his schemes, I'm right back in his world of manipulation and control. Her phone buzzed. Another email from the design community. But this one was different. The Modern Art Museum renovation. She breathed. They're reaching out again. Maya moved closer, reading over her shoulder. The project, Julian said, wasn't your style. They want a fresh perspective. Something bold. Corinne's hands trembled slightly. Something that breaks from traditional Boston aesthetics. And I'm terrified. The admission came easily now. I haven't done anything this contemporary since college. Julian always said, stop. Maya took the putty knife from her hands. What did Corinne say? Before Julian, before his mother's opinions, before you started dressing in beige, what did you want to create? The question unlocked something. Corinne walked to a stack of old portfolios she'd unpacked last week. Inside the bottom one, preserved between tissue paper, were her final projects from RSD. Bold colors, unexpected materials, spaces that challenged conventional comfort for the sake of artistic vision. I wanted to make people feel something, she said softly. Not just walk into a room and think how lovely, but really feel. Disturbed sometimes, or amazed, or just awake. So do that. Maya's voice was firm. Take the project. Make them feel something. Corinne looked around her apartment. At the half-plastered wall, the paint samples spread across the floor, the lingering signs of their takeout dinner from last night. Nothing was perfect. Everything was real. Her phone buzzed again. Julian's name appeared on the screen, probably calling about the buyout offer. For the first time, she didn't feel the instinctive urge to answer. Instead, she picked up her laptop and began composing a response to the museum. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, outlining a vision that would have scandalized the Beacon Hill crowd. Colors that didn't match, textures that challenged, spaces that demanded engagement rather than passive acceptance. You're smiling, Maya observed. I'm breaking patterns. Corinne looked up from her screen. Want to help me paint this room tomorrow? I'm thinking electric blue. Maya's laugh filled the space. Julian's mother would need smelling salts. Good. Corinne returned to her email, adding more details to her proposal. It's time to wake people up. The crack in the wall was still visible, not quite perfectly filled, but in the afternoon light it looked less like a flaw and more like a story, a reminder that sometimes things need to break before they can become something new. The Modern Art Museum's conference room felt different from the corporate boardrooms Corinne was used to. Instead of mahogany and leather, she sat surrounded by glass and steel, her portfolio spread across a table that looked more like an art installation than furniture. Her presentation boards showed designs that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago, spaces that challenged conventional comfort, that demanded engagement. This is unexpected, said Director Amara Washington, leaning forward to study a particularly bold rendering. Especially given your previous work. I know. Corinne met the director's gaze steadily. My aesthetic has evolved. Evolved? A hint of a smile played at Amara's lips. Or emerged? Before Corinne could respond, the conference room door opened. Her heart stopped when Julian walked in, followed by 2 members of the museum's board. He looked exactly as she remembered, perfectly tailored suit, practiced smile, the picture of corporate confidence. "I apologize for interrupting," he said smoothly, as if running into his soon-to-be ex-wife was purely coincidental. The board meeting must have been rescheduled. Amara's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mr. Rosner, this is a closed presentation." "Of course." Julian's smile didn't waver. "Though as a potential donor to the renovation project, I'd be very interested in the direction being discussed." The threat was subtle, but clear. Corinne felt the familiar urge to shrink, to accommodate, to smooth things over. Instead, she stood, her hand resting on her most controversial design board, a multimedia installation that transformed the museum's traditional entrance into an immersive experience. "My direction," she said, emphasizing the word, "is to challenge expectations, to create spaces that wake people up rather than lull them into comfortable numbness." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Rosner." "Miss Hale," Corinne corrected, not looking away from Julian. "And yes, this design is a departure from what you might expect from me, because for the first time in 19 years, I'm not designing to meet someone else's expectations." Julian's practiced smile faltered. "Corinne, perhaps we should discuss this privately." "No." The word came out stronger than she expected. "We've had enough private discussions about my career, don't you think? About what's appropriate, what fits the Rosner image." Amara Washington leaned back in her chair, watching the exchange with keen interest. The board members looked like they wanted to disappear. "This isn't about us," Julian said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone she knew so well. "This is about what's best for the museum's future." "Actually," Amara interrupted, "this is about innovative design." "Ms. Hale, please continue your presentation." Corinne turned back to her boards, but not before catching the flash of anger in Julian's eyes. He wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not by women he considered under his influence. But as he took a seat at the far end of the table, something shifted in the room's dynamic. His presence, once so overwhelming, felt smaller. For the next 30 minutes, Corinne presented her vision. She talked about light and shadow, about challenging spaces that forced visitors to engage rather than simply observe. With each word, her voice grew stronger. She found herself using terms and concepts she'd learned at RISD, ideas she'd buried beneath years of safe, acceptable designs. When she finished, Amara was the first to speak. "This is exactly what we've been looking for. Something that breaks the mold of traditional Boston institutions. It's certainly different," one of the board members said carefully, glancing at Julian. "Different is exactly what we need." Amara stood, extending her hand to Corinne. "The commission is yours if you want it." Julian's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "The Rosner Foundation will need to review." "The Rosner Foundation is welcome to withdraw its donation consideration," Amara said coolly. "We have other funding sources interested in supporting genuine innovation." The walk to the elevator was tense, Julian falling into step beside Corinne. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "This isn't you." Corinne pressed the down button, watched the numbers climb. "That's where you're wrong. This is exactly who I am, who I've always been. You just never took the time to see it." The elevator dinged, doors sliding open. Inside, mirrors reflected their images. Julian in his perfect suit, Corinne in a deep red blazer she'd bought last week. They looked like strangers. "They'll reject it," he said as she stepped in. "Boston isn't ready for this kind of disruption." Corinne smiled, genuine and free. Maybe that's exactly what Boston needs. The doors began to close. "Goodbye, Julian." As the elevator descended, Corinne studied her reflection. The woman looking back at her wasn't the perfect corporate wife anymore. She was something better, herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "How'd it go?" Corinne typed back, "I got the commission, and I think I finally got my voice back." "Never lost it," Maya replied. "Just needed to turn up the volume." The Beacon Hill house loomed before her, familiar yet foreign. Corinne stood on the sidewalk, keys heavy in her hand. Today was the day to collect the last of her belongings, the final thread connecting her to the life she'd left behind. "Want me to go in first?" Maya asked, her solid presence beside Corinne like a shield against memory. "No." Corinne straightened her shoulders. "I need to do this myself." The key turned smoothly in the lock, the door opening to reveal the perfectly maintained foyer. Everything was exactly as she'd left it 2 months ago, down to the arrangement of flowers on the entry table. Fresh ones, she noticed, probably chosen by Heather in an attempt to recreate the home's former atmosphere. Trying too hard, Maya muttered, noting the forced perfection. Classic rookie mistake. Corinne moved through the rooms methodically, boxing up the remaining pieces of her life. Her old sketchbooks from the home office, photo albums from before the marriage, her grandmother's china wrapped carefully in bubble wrap. Each item carried the weight of memory, of choices made and unmade. In the master bedroom, the closet still held the ghost of her presence. Empty hangers where her clothes had hung, bare shelves that once stored her perfectly folded sweaters. On Julian's side, everything remained immaculate, but now shared with newer, younger pieces. Heather's clothes already adopting the neutral palette Julian preferred. She's moved in already? Maya's voice carried a note of disbelief. Of course she has. Corinne ran her hand along the closet door. He hates being alone. Always has. A sound from downstairs made them both freeze. Footsteps, then voices. Julian and Heather, returning early from their lunch engagement. Corinne heard Heather's laugh, the same bright, eager-to-please tone she herself had once perfected. We can go, Maya whispered. Come back another day. But Corinne shook her head. She was done running, done hiding, done making herself smaller to accommodate Julian's comfort. She picked up her box and walked downstairs. Julian and Heather stood in the kitchen. Her kitchen once. Him in his usual business attire. Her in a beige dress that could have come from Corinne's old wardrobe. The similarity was almost painful to watch. Corinne, Julian recovered first, his surprise quickly masked by practiced civility. We weren't expecting. I emailed about collecting my remaining things. Corinne's voice was steady. Last week. Oh, Heather stepped forward, a perfect hostess smile in place. Would you like some tea? I just bought this lovely Earl Grey. That's my tea set, Corinne interrupted quietly. The one Julian's mother gave me for our first Christmas. You'll find I'm quite particular about Earl Grey. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. Heather's smile faltered, and for a moment Corinne saw herself at that age, so eager to fit in, to be molded, to become the perfect Rosner wife. I think, Maya said from the doorway, that's everything we came for. But Corinne wasn't quite finished. She set her box down on the kitchen island and pulled out an old leather-bound book. This was meant to be an anniversary gift, she said, sliding it across the marble surface to Heather. It's a diary of all his preferences, how he likes his coffee, which shirts need special cleaning, when to schedule the seasonal wardrobe rotation his mother insists on. Corinne, Julian warned, his favorite meals for impressing clients, the exact shade of beige his mother considers appropriate for formal events, the complete calendar of social obligations you'll need to manage. She met Heather's increasingly uncertain gaze. Everything I spent 19 years learning, so you don't have to waste your time figuring it out. Heather's hand trembled as she touched the book. I don't understand. You will. Corinne picked up her box again. Just remember, there's a difference between fitting in and fading away. I hope you learned that faster than I did. She turned to leave, but Julian's voice stopped her. You think you're doing her a favor? Showing her how bitter you've become? No. Corinne looked back one last time. I'm showing her what I wish someone had shown me at 25, that there's more than one way to be valuable, that love shouldn't require disappearing. Outside, the autumn air felt clean, new. Maya waited by the car, ready with a hug that Corinne didn't realize she needed until she was in it. You okay? Maya asked softly. Corinne looked up at the house, at the perfect curtains, the manicured window boxes, the flawless facade that had contained her for so long. Through the window she could see Heather still standing in the kitchen, the diary clutched to her chest, while Julian talked on his phone, already disconnected from the moment. You know what? Corinne said, getting into the car. I really am. As they drove away, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. The weight of memory was finally lifting, replaced by the lightness of possibility. The small storefront in Back Bay's art district wasn't much, just a narrow space with tall windows and creaky hardwood floors. But as Corinne stood in its center, Maya's arm linked through hers, she saw possibilities everywhere. You're really doing this, Maya said, watching Corinne measure the space with practiced steps. Your own design studio. Why not? Corinne's voice echoed in the empty room. The museum project is bringing in new clients, real ones, who want innovation, not just the Rosner name. The autumn sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, creating patterns on the floor that seemed to dance with each passing cloud. 3 months ago, she would have immediately planned heavy drapes to control the light, Now she saw the shadows as part of the design, nature's own contribution to the space. Her phone buzzed, an email from her lawyer. "The divorce is final," she said, the words feeling both heavy and freeing. "Julian signed the papers this morning." Maya squeezed her hand. "How do you feel?" Before Corinne could answer, the bell above the door chimed. A young woman entered, clutching a magazine featuring Corinne's preliminary designs for the museum renovation. "Ms. Hale?" The woman's voice wavered slightly. "I'm Lucia Martinez. I've been following your work since the museum announcement and—" She took a deep breath. "I'm opening a fusion restaurant in South End. The designers I've met keep suggesting safe, traditional designs, but what I really want is something that makes people feel something." Corinne finished, recognizing the spark of artistic frustration in Lucia's eyes. "Exactly." Lucia spread photos across the dusty counter. "Everyone says I need to stick to expected themes, that Boston diners want predictable elegance, but you want to wake them up." Corinne moved closer, studying the photos. "Show them something they haven't seen before. They say it's too risky." Corinne laughed softly. "I used to believe that too. That safe was smart. That fitting in meant success." She gestured around the empty studio. "Want to help me break some rules?" For the next hour they sat on the floor, Corinne, Maya, and Lucia, spreading out ideas and possibilities. Lucia's energy was contagious, her vision bold. She wanted to blend her Mexican heritage with modern Boston aesthetics in ways that challenged expectations. "The contractor says these color combinations are too aggressive," Lucia said, showing a particular vibrant palette. "I used to have a mother-in-law who said the same thing about red lipstick." Corinne pulled out her sketchbook. "Let's make it more aggressive." Maya watched them work, a knowing smile on her face. "Look at you, corrupting the next generation of rule breakers." The bell chimed again. This time a well-dressed woman in her 60s entered. Catherine Bradford, one of the clients who'd dropped Corinne after the divorce. "Catherine," Corinne stood, brushing dust from her jeans. "This is a surprise. I saw your museum designs." Catherine's eyes took in the space, the creative chaos spread across the floor. "They're not what I expected." "No, they wouldn't be. My daughter—" Catherine hesitated. "She's renovating her first home. The other designers keep showing her variations of what I would choose, but she wants something different, something that makes a statement." A slow smile spread across Corinne's face. "Something that might scandalize the country club?" "Perhaps it's time they were scandalized." Catherine pulled out her daughter's card. "She'd love to meet with you. If you're taking new clients?" Later, after the impromptu design session had ended and contact information had been exchanged, Corinne and Maya sat in the window seat, watching the streetlights come on. 3 new clients in one day, Maya mused. Not bad for someone who needed the Rosner name to succeed. Corinne leaned back, feeling the century-old window frame against her shoulder. "You know what the best part is? They're not coming to me because of who I was married to. They're coming because of who I am." "And who is that exactly?" Corinne looked around the space, at the sketches spread across the floor, the paint samples taped to walls, the energy of possibility that filled every corner. "Someone who's finally awake." Maya raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To being awake. And to making noise," Corinne added, thinking of that first karaoke night that had started it all. Outside, Boston's evening traffic created its own rhythm, a city pulse that felt new and familiar all at once. Tomorrow, contractors would arrive to begin transforming the space. But tonight, in the gathering darkness, Corinne sat with her best friend and let herself feel the weight of the moment. She was building something new, not just a design studio, but a life, her life. And for the first time in decades, she couldn't wait to see what colors it would hold. 6 months after opening her studio, Corinne stood in the transformed entrance hall of the Modern Art Museum. The space she'd designed was finally complete, a bold interplay of light and shadow, tradition and innovation. Through the geometric skylights she'd insisted on installing, dawn painted ever-changing patterns across surfaces that demanded attention, that refused to fade into the background. "It's absolutely not what anyone expected," Amara Washington said, standing beside her. "And that's exactly why it works." The museum's opening gala would begin in hours. Already, local media had dubbed the renovation Boston's wake-up call, a description that made Corinne smile every time she heard it. On a bench nearby, her latest portfolio lay open, filled with photos of other completed projects: Lucia's vibrant restaurant, Catherine Bradford's daughter's boldly modern home, spaces that defied the city's conservative design expectations. "You've started quite a movement," Amara observed. I've had 3 other institutions call asking about similar renovations. They're ready for change, Corinne said, watching the morning light shift across her designs. They just needed permission to want it. The sound of voices drew their attention to the entrance. Julian stood there with Heather, both impeccably dressed for an early morning museum tour. He'd lost the board vote about withdrawing funding, and now had to maintain the appearance of supportive donor. Heather wore cream silk, her blonde hair styled in the same elegant waves Corinne had once favored. But something was different. As Heather moved through the space, her fingers traced the bold surfaces with unmistakable longing. The diary Corinne had given her 6 months ago had done its work, awakening questions that couldn't be unasked. "Good morning, Julian," Corinne said calmly. "Heather." Julian nodded stiffly, but Heather stepped forward. I've never seen anything like it." Her voice held a note of wistfulness. "How did you know it would work?" "I didn't." Corinne smiled. "I just finally stopped being afraid of it not working." Understanding passed between them, woman to woman, past to future. Heather's hand moved unconsciously to her beige collar, adjusting it as if it suddenly felt too tight. "The board meeting is starting," Julian announced, his hand finding Heather's elbow in that familiar, guiding way. But this time, Heather didn't immediately yield to his direction. "Actually," she said softly, "I think I'd like to stay and look around a bit more." The silence that followed felt like its own kind of awakening. Later that evening, as the gala crowd filled the transformed space, Corinne stood with Maya on the museum's rooftop terrace. Below them, Boston's light sparkled, and above, stars pierced the early spring sky. "Remember when we used to sneak onto the RISD roof?" Maya asked, handing Corinne a glass of champagne. "Making all those big plans about changing the world through design? We were so sure of ourselves then." Corinne leaned against the railing. "Before I learned to be unsure." And now? The door opened behind them as more guests arrived. Among them was a young designer Corinne had recently hired, a talented graduate with wild ideas and wilder hair, who reminded her of herself at that age. "Now?" Corinne smiled. "Now I'm unlearning everything I learned about being unsure." Maya clinked their glasses together. To unlearning, and to letting go. Below, the museum hummed with life, with conversation, with the sound of people encountering something unexpected and being changed by it. Somewhere down there, Heather was probably still wandering, asking herself questions that would change her life. Julian was probably still trying to maintain control of a narrative that was slipping away from him. But up here, under the vast sky, none of that mattered to Corinne anymore. She thought about the day she'd taken off her wedding ring, how terrified she'd been of the empty space it left. Now that space was filled with other things: paint under her fingernails, the keys to her studio, the confidence that came from building something that was entirely her own. "You know what's funny?" she said to Maya. "I spent so many years thinking I needed to hold on tight to everything. The perfect marriage, the right connections, the approved image. But the moment I finally let go, that's when you really started living," Maya finished. Corinne nodded, feeling the spring breeze play with her hair, now streaked with subtle purple highlights that would have given Julian's mother heart palpitations. "That's when I found myself again." From inside came the sound of laughter, of glasses clinking, of Boston's elite encountering a space that refused to let them sleepwalk through it. Her space, her vision, her truth. "Ready to go back down?" Maya asked. Corinne took one last look at the city lights, at the life she'd built from the ashes of the one she'd left behind. She thought about the young designer downstairs, about Heather's questioning eyes, about all the women still learning to hear their own voices. "Yes," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I'm ready." And she was, ready to keep creating, to keep challenging, to keep awakening, herself and others. Ready to live in the bold colors she'd denied herself for so long. Ready to make noise, to take up space, to be gloriously, unapologetically alive. She'd let go of Julian's hand, of society's expectations, of her own carefully constructed cage, and in that letting go, she'd finally found something better, her own hand to hold, her own path to walk, her own story to write, one that was just beginning. 1 year later, the small coffee shop on the corner of Newbury Street buzzed with early morning energy. Corinne sat at her favorite window table, design tablets spread before her, a streak of blue now mingling with the purple in her hair. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see Heather, no longer in beige, but wearing a vibrant green dress that matched the confidence in her stride. "Sorry I'm late," Heather said, sliding into the chair across from Corinne. The real estate agent was finishing the paperwork on my new apartment. You found a place? In South End. Heather's smile held the same liberation Corinne remembered finding in her own reflection months ago. Julian's mother says it's not an appropriate neighborhood for a young professional woman, which is exactly why I chose it. Corinne pushed a portfolio across the table. Then you're going to love these design concepts. Nothing appropriate about them at all. They bent their heads together over the drawings. Two women planning spaces that would wake people up, make them feel, make them think. Through the window, Boston's morning light painted possibilities across their shared work, across their separate but parallel journeys of becoming. Outside, Maya's new counseling center was visible just across the street, its windows decorated with bold artwork from local artists. Inside, women gathered daily to find their voices, their strength, their way back to themselves. Next door, Corinne's design studio had expanded, now occupying 2 floors and employing 3 young designers who weren't afraid to break rules. Her phone lit up with a text from her mother. Saw your feature in Architectural Digest. So proud of you, honey. Your grandmother would have loved it. Corinne touched the small silver key she now wore on a chain, not to the Beacon Hill house or the Berkshires estate, but to her studio, her space, her truth, her morning light. You know, Heather said softly, I never thanked you for the diary, for showing me there was another way. No thanks needed, Corinne smiled. Just keep waking people up. And together they did. One bold design, one brave choice, one authentic moment at a time. The end. What holds you back? The moment Corinne looks at her reflection and finally recognizes herself marks a turning point in her life. That instant when she realizes how many years she has spent being who others wanted her to be, instead of being herself. We all have our own alliances that hold us back. They can be relationships, fears, society's expectations, or even patterns we've internalized. What is your ring that needs to be removed? What would you do differently if, like Corinne, you decided today to stop dimming your own light to make others feel comfortable? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.